Good morning to everybody in Guildford or from wherever you're following the conference. This is Trayce, Arssow in the Republic of Macedonia, and I'll tell you a few words about Voigt's electrical 6-inch recordings for Edison Bell in Britain between 1926 and 1930, as evidenced from test prints preserved in the Voigt collection MUS 142 at the Library and Archives, Canada. During his 8-year-long recording career with Edison Bell, Voigt made thousands of recordings in very different genres, countries, and formats. In this paper, an attempt will be made to survey only one very minor component of his vast output by taking disc format as parameter around which the argument will be constructed. A comprehensive analysis will be provided of the very few 6-inch test discs preserved in the Voigt collection at the Library and Archives, Canada, of which they form but a very small component. By focusing on these few discs, not only a snapshot of a minor part of the Voigt collection will be provided, but also will be offered an insight into the contents of Edison Bell's production on this often neglected 6-inch mini-disc format, as well as the context of Paul Voigt's early electrical mini-disc recordings. In addition, the research methodology in unraveling this intricate historical sound collection will also be touched upon, especially some of the problems and challenges that it poses to a researcher. From the proposed text, it will become evident that Edison Bell had a very elaborate output on mini-discs, but this paper shall by no means attempt to present its entire production in full extent. Instead, the purpose is only to demonstrate how these Voigt's early electrical 6-inch recordings fit into the general picture of Edison Bell's mini-disc production, as well as to find out if anything specific or new can be learned by researching them. But first, some general remarks on the 6-inch mini-disc test prints in MUS 142 at LAC. The 6-inch mini-disc test prints preserved in the Voigt collection amount to only 8 items, comprising not more than 1% of the total count of discs in the collection, which makes it the smallest proportion in it according to disc size, D5, 1 to 8. In terms of contents of the mini-discs, 4 are recorded in Eastern Europe and 4 in Britain, 3 of them with British content, on which the focus in this presentation will be. All 8 mini-discs preserved in the Voigt collection are double-sided, which is a total of 16 sides, each lasting up to 2 minutes or about 30 minutes in total. All the mini-discs are test prints, not commercial releases. Hence, there is no nice clear center label on them to inform the user of their contents. Instead, in addition to the matrix numbers kept in the runout, which is a common feature to all of them, there is a plain label for internal Edison Bell use only, sometimes containing handwritten text designating the matrix number or catalog number or title or artist, or if we're lucky, a combination of some of this, or if totally unlucky, no information at all, or described by LAC staff as faded or illegible. Although in referencing these discs, LAC has designated them as D5 for some reason, all mini-discs recordings preserved in the Voigt collection are 6-inch, hence they date from after the size of Edison Bell's mini-discs was enlarged from 5 3/8 of an inch to 6-inch format in May 1926. In addition to them all being recorded by Paul Voigt, another thing that they have in common is that they had all been recorded electrically, so they come from the period after Edison Bell changed its recording system from acoustical to electrical. However, some are re-recordings of the Bell's back acoustic repertoire, which causes quite a little bit of confusion about their dating and context. Having made these general remarks, now let us go through the few 6-inch discs in the Voigt collection with the purpose to illustrate the method of their research on the one hand, while on the other hand to give an insight into the material which Voigt recorded in this mini-disc format for various Edison Bell labels. Among all 6-inch minidiscs in the Voigt collection, only disc D5-2 has explicit designation, handwritten in pencil on the label on one side of the disc, of it being an electric recording. The matrix numbers indicated on each side of this disc are very low, dating from the pre-electric era, meaning that they are not originally electric recordings. In fact, these tracks may only be re-recordings of earlier titles from Edison Bell's acoustical pre-1926 catalog. This was nothing unusual for Edison Bell and others, considering that the practice of electrically re-recording titles which had previously been released acoustically was widely practiced in those early electric years for many of their 10-inch and perhaps some of their 12-inch releases. What essentially was the case in the aftermath of the change from acoustic to electric recording is that previously acoustically recorded titles were re-recorded electrically, sometimes with an alternate artist, and issued under the same catalog and matrix numbers as the original releases, which is a nightmare for discographers. Yet the later pressings had the letter label design, which is the only help in distinguishing among all these complexities. However, the test discs in the Voigt collection have absolutely no commercial on them whatsoever, which increases the difficulty in identifying not only their contents, but also their context. In the huge majority of discs in the Voigt collection, the titles on both sides of the discs are test pressings, so the pairing in which they can be found on these test discs is seldom the way in which they were coupled in commercial releases. In this sense, D5-2 is a wonderful example. On one side of it, matrix number 286E is stamped in the runout, and handwritten on the label is the title Dear Little Shamrock, and the performing artist as Mill Band, which is consistent with the London Military Band in the listings. The only commercial release that could be traced for Dear Little Shamrock with matrix number 286 is on the Little Britain 380, but no center label image could be found. Little Britain was one of the many obscure British minidisc labels produced by Edison Bell for an unknown client in the early to mid-1920s. The discs were 5 3/8 of an inch, which was the same size as the Bell records at the time, though very much rarer. At least 22 issues are known to have been released on this label. Little Britain, like the Bell, seems to have been mostly aimed at children. Many of the recordings on the Little Britain label are the same as those on the Bell, meaning that a number of early Bell matrices were used on the Little Britain for re-releases. However, neither matrix number 286 nor the Little Shamrock can be found in the Bell listings, so perhaps this title was released exclusively on the Little Britain. Anyhow, regardless of the label or labels of its original release, the recording on Voigt's D5-2 disc marked with 286 is surely not an acoustical recording, but an electrical re-recording of the same title, in this case with the same artist, and on this occasion on the slightly enlarged by now 6-inch disc format. In any case, it is unknown on which of the many Edison Bell minidisc labels this electrically re-recorded title was re-released. On the other side of the D5-2 test disc, matrix number 126 is stamped in the runout, and handwritten on the label is the title Silver Threads Among the Gold, without any indication about the performing artist, but some listings credit the work to Walter Linton. It is on this side of the disc that the designation of it being an electric recording is handwritten on the label. As it was the case with the previous track on the opposite side of this disc, the matrix number is one of the lowest in the Edison Bell series of minidisc recordings, the original acoustical recording dating from the early 1920s. Similarly, in this case too, it is not the original acoustical recording that is preserved, but again it is Voigt's re-recording of the same title by using the new electrical recording method developed by himself. The matrix number corresponds to several Edison Bell releases, yet in all cases without any indication on the center labels about the performing artist. Silver Threads Among the Gold, matrix 126, appears on the Little Britain 371, designated as song, without any artist credit, which was most probably only a mid-1920s reissue of the early 1920s release containing the original acoustical recording, in neither of which had Voigt been involved. According to listings, the same work and metrics number had apparently also been released on Marspen 621, and no central label has been found of that release. But you can see in the corner an image of how the Marspen record central label looked like. The Marspen record was a trade name of British retailer Marks & Spencer, introduced for sale in their stores in the mid-1920s. The pressings of their post-1925 catalog, issues 600 and upwards, were done by Edison Bell using masters from its equivalent label, the Bell. The Matrix 126 appears on a 5-inch and 3/8 of an inch minidisc format release, which means that this issue was released before May 1926, containing the acoustical recording in which Voigt had not been involved. Finally, the same work and metrics number appear on the Bell 279, designated as Ballad, on a label with a post-1925 design, suggesting that this release contains the electrical re-recording made by Voigt, although the catalog number, just like the metrics number, are preserved the same as in the original early 1920s acoustical release. In all of the 3 known issues in which matrix number 126 appears, it is backed with something different. In the case of the Marspen release, it is backed with Sahara song, whereas in the case of the Bell release, it is backed by Oranges and Lemons, which in listings is credited to Edward Holland bass. In the case of the Little Britain release, the other side is Shine, the Ford Dabney title that was current in Britain in 1924, although in one listing it is credited to Stanley Kirkby. Be that as it may, because of contemporary British copyright legislation, considering the royalty on the selling price of the mini-discs, if copyrighted content appeared on both sides of the disc, it would have required Edison Bell to pay a higher charge on the Bell or other of its mini-disc labels. The maker considered this unfair, and quite soon it became commonplace to have a copyrighted work only on one side, backed with a non-copyrighted one, of which there was plenty material around. Therefore, Little Britain 371 has Shine, the popular tune by Ford Dabney, with a copyright stamp, backed with the old 1873 song Silver Threads Among the Gold, without a stamp. Similarly, Little Britain 380 has Foxtrot song Young Along Jasper, backed with the old 1871 song Dear Little Shamrock, which was also ex-copyright. Edison Bell clearly used the Bell masters on a variety of other contract labels, as the Bell back catalog was mined for such suitable material, often for non-copyright stuff. The D52 test disc in the Voigt collection is a perfect example of 2 such electrically re-recorded works. Let us now turn to the second minidisc in this collection, namely D57. On the one side of this disc, matrix number 501A is stamped in the runout, without absolutely any indication on the label about the work or artist. According to listings of Edison Bell's minidisc masters, matrix number 501 may be identified as My Irish Home, Sweet Home by Swain Hanley. It was released as Waltz with Vocal Chorus on the Bell 371, which was one of their earliest releases after the minidiscs enlarged from the 5 and 3/8 of an inch to the 6-inch format in May 1926, so the recording may date from slightly thereafter. Another 6-inch release with identical Waltz and Vocal Chorus label designation exists on the Bell 783, an issue which was part of its Expert series. Finally, the work was released as Waltz by Orchestra on Marspen 700, which was also one of their earliest releases after the disc enlargement to the 6-inch format. All these 3 issues corroborate the contention that both the recording and the several releases date from after May 1926, and that in all releases an original work electrically recorded by Voigt was pressed, not an electrical re-recording of a previous acoustical recording, as was the case with the two previous tracks. The mid to late 1926 dating of the recordings on the 6-inch mini-disc is further confirmed by the text on the label on the other side of this test disc, on which the date 17th of September 1926 is handwritten, although it is not entirely clear whether this is the date of recording or the date of the pressing. Also on this label, the recording engineer's name Voigt is handwritten, albeit misspelled and anglicized, something which Voigt himself utterly resented, because this practice was not only frequently the case on the labels of test discs, but it can also be seen even in his photo in one Edison Bell publication. Additionally, next to his name on the label, there is a designation number 3 in Roman numerals, which appears frequently on other test discs in the Voigt collection, whose exact significance so far has been difficult to determine, but probably it has something to do with the batch of test pressings in which Voigt had been involved. Stepped in the runout and handwritten in pencil on the label is the purported matrix number 106T, while the performing artist indicated as Hemsley undoubtedly refers to Harry Hemsley, the famous and hugely popular contemporary British child impersonator, while the title is transcribed as Daddy's Voice. After comparing and contrasting all available databases, no logical match of any metrics or artist or work identifier was found. In one listing where the matrix 106 appears, it is associated with the title Rule Britannia by His Majesty's Irish Guards Band on the Bell 276 release from the early 1920s. This is consistent with the matrix number from the low hundreds corresponding to such an early recording and release, but not at all to the sequence of matrix numbers typical for mid to late 1926, which are in the low 500s. They are like the metrics on the other side of this disc. Therefore, it is possible that 106T may not be a matrix number at all, but perhaps a control number or something else. Neither the search of such work by the stated artist produced any leads. Harry Hemsley has a prolific discography, but nowhere in it can any similar work be found, except in his 10-inch release on Piccadilly 256 of Daddy's Boy in 1929. Edison Bell made several 8-inch recordings with Hemsley in 1928, released on the radio label thereafter, but as far as the 6-inch mini-disc format is concerned, the most notable are the 12 sides recorded in late 1927 to be released on the Crown 1-6 records as accompaniment for what was then called the pictogram. This was essentially an early attempt at audiovisual entertainment introduced by Edison Bell in 1924, designed to play children's records while a scroll displaying pictures moved in a compartment located behind the record. Whatever the context of the work behind number 106 on disc 257 may be, until further research produces new ideas, this piece would need to remain unidentified. In mid-1927, and again in late 1928 and mid-1929, Voigt was charged by Edison Bell to conduct comprehensive recording expeditions in Eastern Europe, during which he executed over 1,000 recordings in all possible disc sizes. Among them, in the 6-inch format, were 62 sides, which is 5% of all his East European recordings, of which 8 sides, or 30% of all those 6-inch recordings, are preserved in the Voigt collection. But owing to time constraints, they shall not be dealt with upon this occasion, as the focus was on his recordings made in Britain and with British content. That is why also shall not be considered Voigt's 6-inch recordings made in London in 1929 with the Swiss band, a total of 10 sides producing 5 records, one of which is preserved in his collection. And you can see some of the artists on this slide, including the Swiss band, which looks like the Swiss entry in the Eurovision Song Contest 1929. Which leaves us with the third and final 6-inch disc in the Voigt collection, recorded in Britain and with British content, which is dealt with on this occasion, is D56. This test disc is a good example of many similar discs of other sizes in the collection, in the sense that on both sides it contains the same matrix number, in this case it is 804, but from two different stampers. Thus, matrix number 804A is stamped in the runout on one side of the disc, whereas on the other side matrix number 804E is stamped in the runout. And it is also handwritten on the label, in addition to the designation of being recorded in March 1930. Clearly, this is one of the latest matrix numbers for any Edison Bell 6-inch release, the highest seen so far, and it is probably one of the very last in the Edison Bell mini-disc metric series. What is unusual in this 6-inch recording, apart from being one of the last ones, is that it has been made after all Edison Bell mini-disc labels have been discontinued and no more 6-inch discs were produced for wider commercial sales. The title on one side of this test disc has been designated by LAC staff as illegible or faded, whereas on the other side it has been poorly transcribed with the phrase "the carriage of Good Friday" and Lord Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, suggesting some religious context. However, other than identifying the inaugural Swansea bishop as Edward Bevan, nothing more could be found out about its context. No such matrix number, title, or performer could be found in the listings of any Edison Bell 6-inch labels, so it took quite a lot of effort to identify its contents and context. Finally, a revelation came from an unexpected corner, namely from the entry of Robert Fletcher on eBay. Published under the defunct by now Bell label, with its center label design as it was in use between 1925 and 1927, the title actually appears to be The Challenge of Good Friday, a very short-spoken word sermon, more than 10 times shorter than this presentation, whereas the other side is totally blank. On the side with content, there is no catalog number on the center label, and other than the title and performer credits, even the matrix number is not indicated, except being stamped in the runout. Robert Fletcher's copy on eBay has 804J as matrix number. Be that as it may, clearly this was not a release for wider commercial circulation, hence no trace of it could be found in any listings of Edison Bell 6-inch labels. As a matter of fact, this was a custom release which only a person of means, such as an Anglican bishop, could afford to cover the costs for, having paid from his own purse for the recording session executed by Paul Voigt in London in March 1930, and who also purchased the entire print, which was meant to be distributed privately, presumably to be given away for free around his diocese ahead of the approaching Good Friday on 18th of April 1930. All in all, this record is evidence that Edison Bell, other than the hundreds of 6-inch mini-disc records produced for commercial sales, also engaged in this sort of custom releases, further examples of which can be found among the 10-inch discs in the Voigt collection. So, no matter how scarce may be the surviving evidence in Voigt collection pertaining to his involvement with 6-inch mini-disc recordings, it is nevertheless still possible to draw some conclusions. Firstly, it is evident that a significant number of acoustically recorded works from Edison Bell's back catalogue had been re-recorded by using the newly introduced electrical recording method, practice widely applied not only on the 6-inch mini-discs but also on the standard 10-inch discs, especially during the first years since Voigt devised his own recording system. Secondly, Edison Bell clearly endeavored to save as much as possible on payments on account of copyright, so much so that a typical pairing on any of its great many 6-inch mini-disc labels contained one side with the copyrighted material backed with the non-copyrighted material created half a century earlier. Thirdly, despite the very small count of British content, 6-inch mini-discs preserved in the Voigt collection, the sample shows considerable publishing diversity as seen from the half-dozen of labels on which Edison Bell's recordings were released or re-released, including an example of a custom release. Fourthly, analysis of the few 6-inch mini-disc test prints put under the microscope demonstrates the complexities of identifying their content and context, necessitating extensive cross-referencing and applying comparative methodology with the view to establishing facts to a considerable degree. Finally, it is Voigt's underlying presence in all recordings, not only these few 6-inch test discs, but across the board of his collection, that human ingredient which provides a sense of coherency and offers a possibility for understanding not only his own career, but also the practices of one major record publisher. The examination of even this very small sample of the Voigt collection serves the purpose of being a good illustration of the challenges, I would say, rather than now drawing inspiration from the Bishop of Swansea and Brecon, rather than problems that such an undertaking faces on the one hand, while on the other hand of the huge research opportunities yielding further knowledge about the record industry and cultural history of Great Britain, Eastern Europe, and anywhere in between. Thank you very much for your patience.